Today, I want to teach you that just when writers are most fired up to write, when they have just written their lead, they force themselves to pause. They review what they've written and they revise it. They revise the lead because by doing so, they revise their entire story. Sometimes they do this with help from a pro. You already know that the beginning of a piece of writing, any piece of writing, is called a lead because this opening is the way an author leads readers into the text. The lead entices people to walk through the doorway and into the story. I often think that leads are one of the most important things for writers to work on when they revise, because a lead is what ushers readers through the door and gets them to read the rest of the story. That said, you might be saying to yourself, well, that's all well and good, but how do I create a great lead? Of course, you know how to answer that. When you want to learn how to do something, you can study text written by authors you admire. After you look really close at exactly how other authors pull something off, you can try the same techniques in your own writing. Miriam was trying to figure this out the other day, so she decided to study the leads of some stories she knows well. First, she reread the lead to Lawrence Yep's short story Ribbons. It went like this.
The sunlight swept over the broad grassy square, across the street and onto our living room rug. In that bright warm rectangle of light, I practiced my ballet. Ian, my little brother, giggled and dodged around me while I did exercises. A car stopped outside, and Ian rushed to the window. She's here. She's here, he shouted excitedly. Pawpaw's here. Pawpaw is Chinese for grandmother, for mother's mother.
Looking at this story reminded Miriam of things she learned earlier. It often helps to start with the exact words one character is saying, or with a small action. And in a short story, it's important to start close to the main event. If there's a waterfall in the story, start when you can hear the falls. The main tension in this story revolves around grandmother and Stacy. Notice that the lead of the story hints at what will come later.
It was a normal day in the life of my young Winters, me. I had a loud, noisy breakfast which included two twin sisters screaming as my mother brushed their hair, a dog howling for a piece of bacon, and my father putting ketchup on toast like it was a normal thing to do. Then I left at promptly 7:27 to catch my bus. I ordered at Anna Lou's Bad Jokes, got through homeroom, first and second period, and lunch with my posse of friends, May, Luna, and Ruby. Then around came sixth period. Ms. Gulch was my science teacher and even her name was terrible. All I knew about Ashley before I went over there yesterday was that until this year she went to private school and now she sits next to me in math. But she asked me over, and since I couldn't think of a good reason to say no, I said okay. Ashley lives near school, so we walked. We didn't have a lot to talk about on the way, but she didn't seem to mind. She was telling me that when she grows up she wants to be a veterinarian and a movie star, and travel all over the world very glamorously, and live life to the hilt. She asked if I like to live life to the hilt. I mostly just hang around, I admitted. But when you get older, and you can do anything, she whispered, as we began climbing the steep steps up to her huge stone house. What do you like to imagine? I was a little winded from the steps, so I just shrugged. Like, I am constantly imagining I can fly, said Ashley, spreading her arms wide. Do you ever imagine you're flying? I stopped for breath. I sometimes imagine I'm in a bakery.
The author, Rachel Valley, used a lot of techniques. The way in which she crafted the lead is one we could examine and talk about for hours. So pause the video and reread it again. As you reread on your own, pay attention to what part of the lead stands out for you. and then name that part so you can emulate it. Writers, you may have noticed that it has less dialogue, and the dialogue starts later down the lead. When I try to learn from other authors, I push myself to name what a writer has done, not just what he or she hasn't done, because it's easier to emulate something positive. What did Vale do instead of writing lots of dialogue? The author does some subtle work with the setting right away, so that the reader needs to infer. But also, even before we see the house, we see the narrator walking alongside Ashley, a person the narrator doesn't know very well. It's not the author who describes the setting, is it? It's the narrator who notices it. And what do you make of that huge house with the big, endless steps? Why did the author write the setting in such a way that there is a mention of how big and fancy Ashley's house is right from the start? Try to push yourself to name what Rachel Vale has done in this lead. I'm sure you noticed a lot of techniques. Now, let's all listen again to Miriam's first lead and think whether the techniques we've learned from Vale could help her as she gets ready to revise this lead. Listen again.
It was a normal day in the life of my young Winters, me. I had a loud noisy breakfast which included two twin sisters screaming as my mother brushed their hair, a dog howling for a piece of bacon, and my father putting ketchup on toast like it was a normal thing to do. Then I left at promptly 7:27 to catch my bus. I laughed at Anna Lou's bad jokes, got through homeroom, first and second period and lunch with my posse of friends, May, Luna, and Ruby. Then around came sixth period. Ms. Gulch was my science teacher and even her name was terrible.
So Miriam, what did you decide to do with your original story?
I decided to start even more in the action, the way Rachel Vale gets them right at Ashley's house. Even though I liked all the stuff about Maya's family, especially her dad using ketchup on his toast, I decided it was more important to set up Ruby and Maya's relationship right away and get them to science class as fast as possible. Ruby has been my best friend since we were in diapers, as my mom would say. She is the most tender-hearted person you could ever know, and is scared of May things, spiders, disappointing anyone in any way, shape or form, and Ms. Gulch. Then I would go back to the rest of my first lead and the next sentence would be Ms. Gulch was our science teacher. Even her name was terrible.
Writers, do you see what Miriam learned from other authors to try in her own lead? Today, each of you needs to decide what you will do. Some of you are probably realizing that to write with this sort of detail, you need to rethink your story plan, figuring out how you can zoom in more on your scenes. Some of you may decide that you need to do some revisions that are similar to those Miriam has done. You will want to study published leads for yourself, learning more techniques. All of you will be drafting and revising in some way, but you'll need to decide how to go about doing that. Remember, you can always use the resources at your disposal. The anchor charts, the narrative checklist, mentor text, everything in your notebook to help.